We have our first speaker for you. His name is Nemral Mehta, and he's the chief technologist at Booz Allen Hamilton, and he's going to be giving a talk titled "A Strong Belief Loosely Held: Bringing Empathy to IT." Please welcome Nemral.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. How's everyone doing? Surviving the middle of the week? You made it halfway. Woo! Yeah? All right. A little bit hungover? A little bit? Okay. Today it's all about hydration. That's all you gotta do is drink water. I'm Nemral Mehta. I'm a chief technologist at Booz Allen Hamilton. We're a large system integrator doing public sector consulting. I'm a Docker captain as well. I see some other captains in the crowd. So if you see me in the hallways and stuff, don't ask me any Docker questions, all right? Just kidding. You can ask me Docker questions. And now Kubernetes questions. DevOps, all the things. I'm a big believer in DevOps, and you can find me on Normal Faults. Please follow my dogs on Instagram. They have way more followers than me. Okay, so what's this talk all about? So technology is easy. That's what the rest of this conference is all about. It's about getting technology to help you build your apps quickly and deploy. Culture is hard. People are hard. And that's what this talk is about. It's about some ideas and starting the conversation around how to deal with the cultural side of your IT organization and how empathy can be used to drive that change. So I don't have all the answers, and this presentation will likely raise more questions than answers, and that's okay. Let this be a start of the conversation. This is the second time I've done this presentation, so I haven't gotten much feedback, but if you guys have ideas, or if you all have some ideas afterwards, some new things, or if I mess up the game theory part of this, or if you're a PhD in economics, and you're like super smart about game theory, you might want to leave right now because I'm going to destroy it. It's going to be so wrong. But if you're not, you're going to learn something new, all right? So this presentation is kind of two parts. The first part is, I think that might be you. The first part of this presentation is why this matters for your organization and for your teams and for your company. The second part of this is going to be game theory, and then the third part is about empathy, okay? So why does this matter? So I have this thing called Yoda on IT culture. I love controlling the IP address allocation spreadsheet. Who here has done that? Kept Excel spreadsheet with your IP addresses? What's this DevOps stuff? So that's the fear. What's this automation stuff? The first reaction to a lot of these new things is fear. And what does that lead to? Anybody? Anger. Apparently no one's seen Star Wars in here. Why do we have to change this process? I don't like it. I don't want to lose control. And what does anger lead to? Hate. How are we supposed to keep track of our IP addresses now? And what does hate lead to? Suffering. Why does it take 100 days to get a virtual machine? This is a European crowd, so I'm pretty sure no one knows what this diagram on the right is. If you're interested, this is the US Defense Department acquisition process. You can get an associate's degree in a year and a half just on the Defense Department acquisition process to acquire pencils and virtual machines. Why does it take 100 days to get a container, right? I'm not saying containers are virtual machines, but if you're in that state of suffering, so a lot of your IT organizations, you're here, you're at this point, you're suffering. And what that causes is something called, what Adrian Krakow says, is organizational scar tissue. You're hitting this wall. This is how we've always done this. I'm not going to change. So that state of suffering is what John Willis calls a bad equilibrium, and I'm going to go into this. So the middle part of this presentation is borrowed with permission from John Willis. He's a DevOps guru. You can check him out on Twitter at Botchgaloop. This is all his stuff. I'm going to go pretty quick through that. And so there's this idea of a bad equilibrium. So I'm going to go through that. And that's what that state of suffering is in your organization. So here's the game theory part. A bad equilibrium, so if you think of your IT organization as a kind of game, which most kind of systems are, a bad equilibrium is a strategy where all the players in the game, so your devs, your ops, have adopted and converged on, but it does not produce the best outcome for anyone. And I think that's kind of where a lot of organizations are. So there's this gentleman, Pareto. He came up with this idea of 80-20. He also came up with this other thing called Pareto efficiency, which is a state of allocation of resources in which it's impossible to make an individual better off without at least someone else getting worse off. So that's zero sum. That's war games, right? Okay. There's the inverse of the Pareto efficiency. That's Pareto inefficiency. That's a situation where if someone can be better off, but no one else has to lose something from that. So there's a game where it's not zero sum. That's a really important thing, and I'll come back to it, but most IT organizations and most companies are not zero sum. It's not, if a dev or an ops person does something, they're probably not taking away from someone else, right? So most organizations are in a Pareto inefficient state, which is good. Does anyone know who this is? This is John Nash. He's a mathematician who passed away in 2015. He got a Nobel Prize in economics for his game theory on equilibrium states in games. So there's this thing called a Nash equilibrium. So if you have this kind of game situation, and it's a concept where no player in that game has any incentive to deviate from their chosen strategy after they've learned the other person's strategy. So that's kind of where games end up. And so I'll show you an example of what like Nash equilibrium looks like, and then an example of that, a typical example, textbook example, is the prisoner's dilemma. The prisoner's dilemma was created into a game show in the UK called Golden Balls. I don't know why, but they did. And so we're going to watch this clip, and you'll kind of get an idea of how this kind of game plays out, okay?
I know you're the last two people in the country I have to explain this to, but you have two final golden balls. You each have a golden ball with the word split written inside. You each have a golden ball with the word steal written inside. You will make a conscious choice of choosing the split or the steal ball. If you both choose the split ball, you split today's jackpot of £100,150 and you go home with £50,075. If one of you splits and one of you steals, whoever chooses the steal ball will go home with £100,150. And the person who chooses the split ball goes home with nothing. If you both choose the steal ball, you go home with nothing. Okay. Before I ask you to choose, I want you to look at your two golden balls and make sure you know which is the split ball and which is the steal ball. This is very important. Make sure you don't show each other. Before I ask you to choose, I think you have some talking to do to each other.
Stephen, I just hope they weren't puppy dog tears and they were real tears and you were genuinely going to split that money.
I am going to split this. That's 50,000. I'm just, it's unbelievable. I'm very, very happy to go on with 50,000.
You were genuinely going to split the money.
If I stole off you, every single person over there would run over here and lynch me.
There was no way I could. I mean, everyone who knew me would just be disgusted if I'd stolen them.
When people watch this, they're not going to believe it.
Please.
I can look you in the, Sarah, I can look you straight in the eye and tell you I am going to split. I swear down to you, I am going to split.
Okay. This is serious money.
It is.
Sarah, Steve, choose either the split or the steal ball now. Hold it up.
We're going on with 50 grand each. I promise you that.
Split or steal?
Oh.
All right, so it's a version of the prisoner dilemma. I know, craziness. If anyone says these are not puppy dog tears, like don't believe them at all. You're done. You're going to lose the game. So the idea of the game, so the way the game show is designed is they try to present it as a zero-sum game, right, between the two players. But it's actually, they designed the game so that the Nash equilibrium means that they don't want to pay out. So each of the person's strategy is to steal. That's like the most optimal strategy. But if they both steal, they'll end up with nothing, right? That's what the game show wants. They don't want to pay 100,000 pounds to the contestants. And so what we just saw was like the dynamics of two players thinking it's a zero-sum game and kind of optimizing their strategy and lying. And that's kind of what's going on between your devs and ops, right? There's like lying and no accountability, and there's this kind of game. And it's because you think you're in this zero-sum, you think you're Pareto efficient, but you end up at a Nash equilibrium. Your IT organization, if you're hitting walls all the time, you're here. And guess what? What does a Nash equilibrium mean? It means you have no incentive to change, even if you know the other person's strategy. Okay. Luckily, there is a thing, and this is the theory, called a Pareto inefficient Nash equilibrium. So what happens when you're not zero-sum, but you're still stuck in a Nash equilibrium? That's what a bad equilibrium is, and that's what most IT organizations are. You're not in a zero-sum game. A Pareto-efficient Nash equilibrium gives you permission and proof to change the game. Your leadership, you should take this to your leadership and say, look, this is where we are. Like, mathematically, this is where we are as an organization. We have to step back and change the game. How do you do that? So this is another clip from Golden Balls, and you'll see what happens when someone realizes that the game they're playing is not the one that everyone thinks they're playing, and they change the game.
Okay. It's the easiest choice, but the most difficult one. What I want you to do is to spend half a minute talking to each other about what you both should do. Nick, Ibrahim.
Ibrahim, I want you to trust me. 100% I'm going to pick the steel ball.
Sorry, you're going to...
I'm going to choose the steel ball.
You're going to take the
I
steel?
want you to do split, and I promise you that I will split the money with you.
Well, after you've took the steel?
Yeah.
You're going to take steel?
Yeah.
I'm going to take split?
Yeah.
So you take the money?
And I will split it with you.
After the show?
Yeah. Ibrahim, I promise you I'll do that. If you do steal, we both walk away with nothing. I'm telling you, 100% I'm going to do it.
I appreciate that. Right, I'll give you another alternative. Why don't we just both pick split?
I'm not going to pick split. I'm going to steal. Ibrahim, honestly, 100% I'm going to steal.
It's in your nature to steal.
No, I'm honest, and I'm going to tell you...
You're an honest
I am. That's why I'm telling you I'm going to steal. If you do split, then I will split the money.
I can't see myself doing that.
Okay, well, I'm going to steal, so we're going to leave with nothing.
Where's your brains coming from? If I gave you my word... Now, let me tell you what my word means.
Okay.
My father once said to me, a man who doesn't keep his word is not a man. He's not worth nothing. Not worth a dollar.
I agree.
So...
Ibrahim, I'm going to steal. So you've got the choice. You either steal, and we both walk away with nothing. Because you know, I've told you my intention, and I've told you that I will split the money with you, Ibrahim.
And I do now have to push you for a decision. It's a tough one.
We've lost it. We've lost everything.
Okay. You've lost then.
We're walking away with no money because you're an idiot.
No, that's not
You're an idiot. You're an idiot. That's what you are. You're an idiot. You're an idiot. That's what you are. Right, I'll tell you what. I'm going to go with you.
Okay.
I'm going to go.
I promise you I will split it.
You cannot change your balls now. Split or steal? Yes! Congratulations, you're both split.
So what happened there? So this ended up changing the game show completely. They actually canceled the show because Nick figured out that they're not in a Pareto efficient zero-sum game. They're actually in a Pareto inefficient game where there's options outside the game. So he said, I'll steal, and then I'll split it with you outside of the game, right? But you have to trust me. That's changing the game. He understood what they were doing. They were playing this prisoner's dilemma, and that the Nash equilibrium naturally was here, where they would both steal. So what he did was he removed that option from Ibrahim. He said, nope, I'm just going to steal, and you're going to have to deal with it. That automatically made Ibrahim less risk-averse, because he's, if you just meet a stranger, you don't know if he's going to steal or split, right? But he changed the incentive by just removing that option completely and then giving a new option outside of the game rules, right? And changed the game. And that changed the incentive for Ibrahim to go from steal, which is his natural incentive, to split. And Nick knew that was going to happen. He forced that probability to happen. Does that make sense? This is where your organization is. You need to step back and realize that you have to change the game. Okay, so what does changing the game mean for an IT organization? It means building a learning organization. It means DevOps. It means adopting these new technologies, CI/CD pipeline. For this conversation, I'm going to focus kind of on DevOps as the main way to change an organization, and then we'll bring empathy into that, as you'll see. So how can we foster DevOps culture in an organization? We use the force. What's the force? Empathy. Empathy and some behavioral economics, okay? So I'm going to go through some kind of ideas to kind of get the thoughts starting in your heads, and then after this, if you have any other ideas of how to use these techniques or new techniques, please let me know. So one thing that happens in organizations is group selection bias, and that means that if you were to naturally group up this room, all the security folks would find each other, all the storage folks would find each other, all the network folks would find each other, and you just hang out and you become a tribe, right? Kind of like Docker and Kubernetes. Okay? Now you got to understand that tribalism and group selection bias is really bad for an organization. So you have to incentivize diversity of teams. That's what DevOps is about, DevOps, right? It's about making teams of every type of person in your organization. Not having a network team and a security team, but having a team where there's a network person, a security person, but they all kind of know all the different pieces and parts of the application they're trying to deliver and responsible for the overall microservice or application, right? Incentives. You want to use incentives to align to what you want to have as your organizational outcome. That's behavioral economics. So an example that I've seen and that we used in a project of mine was we wanted everyone to make chef scripts and Docker files for stuff, and we wanted to incentivize that upfront work. So what the client wanted was change control board. Okay, who here knows what a change control board is or has to go through one? Okay. Now, what a change control board is basically a manual way of doing like Word docs for your installation of your application and reviewing those changes. It's much better to capture that as infrastructure as code and put the documentation into that. So we incentivized it. If you did infrastructure as code, whether it was Chef or Docker, you automatically go through the change control board. But if you didn't, you had to go through a 2-week review. That automatically incentivizes everyone to do infrastructure as code. Think about other incentives in your organization and how you can apply that to get the things that you want. So if you're adopting Docker right now, think about what ways to incentivize people to make Docker files for their application, and just take those 10 seconds to take that Word document and turn it into, or that bash script really, into something a little bit more formal. Creating positive incentive paths is a way to break that bad equilibrium. Empowering change. This one's really tricky, and it requires really stepping back and full bottom-up and top-down change in idea of how the culture in an organization is, but it's really important. The whole entire DevOps style of culture is based off of like Lean and the Toyota method, where everyone in the whole entire production system of software or whatever it was has the authority to change their environment and bring those issues up and control over their own abilities, right? And that's important. You have to empower folks to be able to change culture. If you don't allow innovation to breed an organization, you can never break the negative process loop that, like, often that's the suffering part you're in. There's this other talk I do about compliance at Velocity, which is really boring topic, but I try to make it exciting. There's this loop that happens, right? If you've got regulation, the first thing you do is try to find a loophole. What does a loophole lead to? A scandal. When some vulnerability gets hacked, what does that lead to? Policy and a review, and that leads to new regulation. That's a negative feedback loop. The only way to break that is to innovate and step back. All right, how can we foster empathy? So why did I switch the word DevOps and empathy? We'll get to that in a second. So this idea of, these are just a list of things that really help change an organization and start to change the conversation you have between your teams. So there's this idea of strong opinions loosely held. So the idea behind this talk was a question I got asked, which is something that I can teach other people not to do that I did. And one example was to really quickly dismiss a junior developer's, a junior operations person's viewpoint and question. I kind of just, they asked, and I thought it was like a dumb question, and I completely dismissed their point of view, really off the cuff. What I didn't realize is that person probably was probably nervous about coming up to me, probably did some research, maybe didn't understand what they were talking about or didn't know some pieces, approached me the wrong way, and I automatically just dismissed them really quickly. That was awful. I mean, to them, to me, it didn't, I was like, okay, just go on by with my day. To them, that could have really changed how they approach other people in the future, how they might become more defensive in the future, and maybe they don't bring up legitimate points of view and legitimate things that are of concern, just because I've dismissed that. And if I did that over and over again, that would be really bad. The idea there is that I had some strong opinions that were strongly held, and I just dismissed anything that was outside of that box, you know? Docker, tattoo, right? What you should think about is having strong opinions. I mean, it's okay to have opinions. There's technical decisions to be made. There actually has to be decisions, right? But you should loosely hold them on. You should be open to new ways and new things and new ideas. And if you realize that someone has a misunderstanding about something, turn that into an active listening moment. So you have to turn yourself into an active listener. If we had some more time, I would make you guys all go through an exercise about active listening, but I'm not going to. You should sigh a big sigh of relief for that. And you should avoid assumptions about even the technology that you feel you have a lot of understanding about. I mean, at this point in our industry, it's almost impossible to know everything that's going on. Even in something like, if you've been doing networking for 20 years, there's probably something like content-centric networking that you've never seen before and that you might not know about but is relevant to you. And avoid assumptions about what you strongly hold on to. Think about incentives in your organization to incentivize teaching and incentivize learning. Think about putting that into your review process. Think about every moment there's some kind of failure, turn that into a moment of understanding. Understand what was happening on the other side of the table to cause that series of events. Become empathetic about the other side of the other point of view, and don't become automatically defensive. We are so ingrained to become defensive because we become these tribes. I want to do virtual machines. I want to do containers. I want to do React. I want to do Java. I want to do Go. These are all tribes. Yes, it's great. It's great for branding. It's good for stickers on laptops. But really, we're all in the same community. It's not zero-sum. We're not fighting anybody, okay? Except for maybe time. But that's an endless battle, okay? Recognize the stress levels of others, okay? So John Willis has a really great talk about, and blog post about burnout. And we have to all understand that as an industry, we have a real deep core issue with stress levels and burnout. And all these things, that Pareto inefficient Nash equilibrium state that all of us are in, breeds stress. It breeds burnout. We have these burnout waves, right? And we don't know they're waves, but we think when we hit the peak that it just stays like that, and then we can't handle it. We're not great. Us human beings, are these things right here, not great at handling all that. Machines, all day. You can burn them up. We're humans. Don't burn us up, right? Understand the stress levels of other people in your organization. Understand that if you're going to burn hot just to make a delivery point, that is a mortgage on something else in the future. You're paying a premium for something that might not be worth it. So always step back and understand that burnout will happen and try to alleviate that as much as possible and keep your team moving forward. It's just like in the Google SRE book, they don't let any of the SREs do more than 50% of like the trouble tickets and support role. That's to avoid these burnout waves, or to alleviate these burnout waves. So be a champion for empathy. What do you need to understand from the other side? That's the first question you should be asking. The first question you typically do is like, what did I do wrong? What did they do wrong? Oh no, I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to have to deal with this. I've got to pick up my kids. I don't want to have to like review this. Step back, ask, what do I need to understand about the other person and what they're trying to do in that situation? Does anyone else in the organization have that same challenge? There's so many organizations I've been in where no one has the confidence and no one has and everyone has a fear of speaking up. That's a very toxic environment, and you can break that by just stepping back and saying, does anyone else have the same challenge that we're trying to face here? Does anyone have any ideas about how to brainstorm through those problems instead of just stepping back and being, oh, it's not my problem, it's their problem. Just throwing over the fence, step back and say, how can we learn and how can we grow from this? Become an active member of your DevOps community. So I'm not even going to, is anyone Danish here? Can someone say that? Hygge? Okay, hygge. I liked Steve Singh's talk yesterday about community. The Docker community, I'm a Docker captain, it's a very strong community, and it's really opened me up to lots of different perspectives, lots of international points of view, and different technologies and different ways of thinking, and we're very supportive of each other in the Docker captain community, and helping provide and bringing that to the broader community. There's nothing that stops you from being that same person in your organization, in your community, in IT in general. We're all here to support each other. We're not fighting each other. I mean, yes, you might be an insurance company competing against another insurance company, but at the end of the day, you're still dealing with storage and network and AWS. Like, those are typical situations. We should all try to learn from each other. That's why you're here. Don't think about, is it Docker versus Kubernetes? Is it, I don't know. I can't think of any other conflict in IT right now that's bigger. But, is it that? No. It's about driving our ability to deliver software faster. It's about driving our ability to deliver software more reliable. That's what we're all focused on. The labels of Docker or Kubernetes or whatever are technical kind of decisions, but at the same time, we're all in the same kind of spot trying to move forward, right? And you got to step back and think, is it really worth having these insane arguments about, I don't know, tabs versus spaces or something? No. Step back. We're all in this together. We're on the same ship, all right? I would highly recommend checking out Lorinda's podcast that she did at Geek Whispers, and mine as well, if you see it. Unfortunately, Geek Whispers is no longer doing podcasts, but she did this great interview about happiness at work. And there's a lot of great material about what it means to be empathetic in your organization and what it means to be empathetic with yourself. And I think that's a big part of it too. Understanding who you are and what drives you and what you need to do to make sure that you're successful and not burning out and stressing out and then reflecting that all over the place, right? Into weird avenues like what library you want to manipulate strings with. So some ideas are, never underestimate the power of human connections. Assume people have positive intent. I didn't assume that junior developer had positive intent. I didn't even assume he had intent, right? And that was so bad. Half a year later, it dawned on me that I did something really stupid, And I could have just taken 5 minutes and talked to the person and directed them towards something that would have helped them. Instead, I just dismissed them. Everything is solvable in the end. There is a solution out there. And don't let negativity just compound on you. The events that are around you shape you. Coming here will shape you. You'll be a better person to technically advocate for containers. You'll be a better person to technically advocate for building a better IT organization. You're going to go to your boss and say, we're in a Pareto inefficient Nash equilibrium, and we can't get out. We have to step back. And he's going to be like, what the hell are you talking about? Or she's going to be like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about, right? You're that person that's going to help break down that wall. If you're constantly hitting that wall, whether it's like compliance or security or compliance or security, you're that person now that says, okay, I have to step back and educate that security team, understand what their values are, what they're concerned about, what their fears are, probably WPA2 as of yesterday morning, and understand how we can both work together to alleviate and accelerate our development lifecycle. Does that make sense? So it dawned on me while I was talking to the other captains about my talk that Docker is actually a tool to foster empathy in your organization. Why is that? We have this thing called a Docker file. What is a Docker file? Hopefully you guys have gone to some Docker file sessions or Docker 101. A Docker file is a joint document where the developers and the operations staff are working together to a common goal, delivering your application. Guess what? That's empathy. It's actually like a infrastructure. It's like empathy as code, essentially. Oh, I know. I'm going all the way there. All right. I mean, you're debating and you're like understanding their point of view. They don't want all of that Linux distribution. Like they don't want your cups printer driver inside your container. And you're like, I just want to make this work. I want like every library under the kitchen sink in there. And you're negotiating and you're understanding both points of view. You want all the ports open. They just want one port open or none. And that's like a negotiation and an empathetic exercise captured in a document. Whoa, that's craziness. If you are in that stuck state in your organization, there's this idea in DevOps of identifying your true north. There was a great talk at ChefConf from Alaska Airlines, where the CTO was talking about their true north is 60 seconds, and that's the time it takes them to overhaul the plane to get it ready for the next trip. So passengers deplane, and then they have 60 seconds to kind of get the plane ready for new passengers. And if they hit that mark, it gives them the ability to purchase 3 new airplanes every year. So if everyone hits that 60-second mark, that's their true north. Everything in the organization points toward that. I've seen other IT organizations where they adopt any technology that makes them move faster. Anything that shaves off the time to deploy new features and software, that's their true north. If it was a fax machine and a pigeon carrier, they would adopt it. That's their true, and what a true north does is it becomes a third-party, neutral party in these technical debates and these architectural decisions that you can use as a reference point to alleviate those debates. I'm saying in this talk, if you're in an organization that is hitting these walls, make empathy, and you don't have to do it forever, but temporarily make empathy your true north in your organization. That's how you're going to break down and get out of that Nash equilibrium. The core of DevOps is really empathy. It's in the word. It's in DevOps. And it really is the driving force of what all this DevOps stuff and everything that we're trying to do is trying to gear toward introducing empathy in our organization. And I hope I've proved that today. Thank you. So if anyone, I have like 30 seconds, I think. 5 minutes? Okay, if anyone has any questions, please go up to the microphone. Don't just yell them out. If anyone's confused, if anyone thinks I did the Nash equilibrium and game theory stuff wrong, please come after me after this.
Hey, thanks for the great talk.
Uh-huh.
So a few months ago, I made a case in my organization for establishing a security team, like a separate team whose sole responsibility is security. Now, I'm thinking whether I should make another case about abolishing or dismantling the security team and putting the engineers in product teams?
Yeah. So here's the question for you. Is your security team doing Nessus scans or scans after the, some part in the process? How far on the right of that process is that security scan? And here's the golden question. Do the developers have access to that scan? Why do not? Okay, so here's your developer sitting here. They're coding up their stuff. They're putting like these really crazy libraries and string libraries and some SQL injection library and they're just like putting all that stuff. Like 6 months later, when they're ready to deploy to production, the security team's like, whoa, this Nessus scan shows you have like a level 5, high vulnerability. Why doesn't the developer have access to that? They're great. It's like if you take an exam and you have no idea what you're getting graded on. You don't know if you can use pencil or paper. You have no idea, right? And then at the end, there's some team, some schmuck, right? And the security team's like, no, you can't use this, string concatenate left. And if you get that reference, let me know. Library that, NPM is not signed and all that. So if you're going to have a separate security team, at least give the developers access to the security scans and stuff and move all that stuff as far to the left as you possibly can so that you can increase the velocity. If that's a problem, then yes, I would probably put the security folks into each team and let that conversation happen while they're designing and programming and coding and code reviews, catch it as early as possible. I mean, I've been in organizations in the public sector, in the government, where the security scan takes anywhere between 6 months to 12 months after you're production ready. So they won't put you in production. So that means that you want to put a new feature in, that's 18 months, right? That's ridiculous. We had to talk to that security team, understand what their goals were, right? What they were scanning for. Then we actually purchased all their same tools on a separate contract, installed them in our environment, and gave all our developers access to that. And so by the time we got to that production, that 6-month review was like literally 3 days because we had already accomplished all the things that we knew they needed. The problem they had, which we didn't know, is that they only had like 4 people and they couldn't handle reviewing our whole entire application. Yeah. So does that make sense? Does that kind of click? It's like shocking every time I see that developers don't have access to the security standing stuff. It's probably why we're in the state we are now, right?
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you very much for the amazing talk. I have a question. Some traditional developers will say, slow down, you are moving way too fast.
Yes.
And that's not how we do things, and we don't like it. So how exactly do you use empathy to integrate more legacy mentality developers into the rapid pace of DevOps? And how do you change their mentality so that they don't fear and embrace changing their skill set? Thank you.
Yep, okay. So not every organization has a true north of speed. So DevOps, yeah, it's geared toward velocity, but that's not necessarily the case. Like in the government, there's some systems where we don't want to move fast. They're really mission critical, and things break. It's hard to update. It might be hardware or something where it doesn't have internet connectivity. So what I would say for that is understand what the fear is on that other team that's supporting that legacy, what their fear is of moving faster, and if it's because they're afraid of breaking things or not being able to catch up or too many changes at the same time, it's okay to be slow. I've a lot of contracts where our true north was not moving fast. It was about repeatability and reliability and security. And that was what our true north was. It wasn't about getting features out there really fast. It was about being able to recover from a disaster better. And that's probably what drives a lot of legacy application, like this is how we do it, because there's a fear of not knowing how well you're going to be recovering from some kind of event. And a system that is known is better than a system that is unknown, right? And so understanding that fear and then starting to take little nibbles off of that, adopt infrastructure as code, automate the disaster recovery, automate backups, doing those small things and start using technology to build a safety net. And then you can start to use empathy to change the culture. But use empathy to have everyone understand that that's what they're building, right? If you step back and, so one example that I've seen is, how long does it take for you to change a period to a comma on your main web page? You know, go through that exercise. It's not a dramatic change, but it gives you an understanding of what all the little things that you need to get done and where the pain points are to start optimizing, and then optimize that for reliability or security or speed, whatever it is that drives your organization. Make sense? I hope I answered that. We good? All right, that's it. Thank you.